Well, I say get this party started, but apparently it's already started. Again, no pastor would complain about a church being happy to see each other.
Man.
He does, something's wrong with him.
Yeah.
I want you to be in a good mood before I start talking. So welcome to our Sunday school for the adults for Sunday morning, September 3rd, 2023. Share my screen and let's get rolling here. We are in the age of the patriarchs as we are going through the entire Bible story. We are currently in the book of Job, having gone through the book of Genesis. We've gone from Joseph now to Job. And so we'll be in chapter 8, if you'd like to find your way over there, as I do so myself. But some quick opening thoughts here to get the juices flowing here. Think about this. So what I've got here showing on the Google Earth satellite imagery here, here's the line we go, going from Jerusalem down to Mount Sinai. Right over here between those 2 points is the Red Sea crossing. They came down around and came back around here to Mount Sinai. So right up there is Mount Seir. That's where Edom, the Esau folks are, the Edomites. So we've got Esau over here, Midian underneath us, Mount Sinai right here, the land of Uz right here where Job is taking place. Okay. Now, with that in mind, think about this. Follow my thought process here. We know angels have set foot on earth. Everyone's good with that. So has God. We recognize that. So Mount Sinai here. Think about this. Mount Sinai was already holy ground when God in the burning bush told Moses to remove his sandals. Moses came to something that was already there and was told, this is holy ground, take your sandals off. So that was already holy ground. Angels and God have already set foot on earth. Is it possible that the meeting described to us in Job chapter 1 with God is on Mount Sinai, overlooking us? And God says, have you considered my servant Job? Over here. And is actually able to point in that direction. There is a possible mountain of God. We touched on this a few years ago, overlooking the Garden of Eden, from which Satan would have been cast down and then set his sights on Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The idea of gods and mountains has developed since then. We've talked about how the local city-states down in Mesopotamia, they're fighting over Nippur, which is their Mount Olympus. It's where all their group of gods meet on that mountain at Nippur. Over in Phoenicia, there's Mount Zephon, where folks meet with the gods and then come on down and take over the promised land in some areas. Of course, we know from Greece, Mount Olympus and all that stuff. So the idea of gods and mountains has been common in our history and mythology, but everything comes from something. So just an interesting consideration that it's a possibility, could have been right here on already holy Mount Sinai, that God was having his discourse with the angels and Satan and overlooking and pointing out, hey, my servant Job right here in us. So interesting spot where from this mountaintop, you could see the Red Sea crossing. You could see Jerusalem. You could see Moses and Midian down here. So I just thought I'd throw that out there for consideration. So let's get the slideshow going here. We are up to 4. We are still on this one here. Yeah, that's the one I want. So let's bring this in to 2023. Let's bring this into this very last week, because something just happened this very last week. Wednesday night, August 30th. While we were here having our discussion on the 7 churches of Asia, something was happening over in the Promised Land. 4 Israeli Defense Force soldiers were wounded in Joseph's tomb terror explosion. This just happened last Wednesday night. And so over in Nablus, which in the Bible is Shechem, where Joseph's bones were taken, the anti-Israeli forces set off a bomb trying to discourage a visit. The soldiers were there preparing the way for a visit that was going to happen to the next day, Jews coming to visit in at Joseph's tomb there. Well, the city of Shechem, we know, of course, from Levi and Simeon, destroying the town because of what happened to their sister in Shechem. Well, Shechem has always had a hard time with the Jews. And so here they are, Shechem, and this is considered like West Bank, which is really Samaria, Judea, and all that stuff. So they are resentful of Joseph's tomb being in what they consider to be their turf. And so they're trying to discourage. It's almost like having a Fort Sumter in South Carolina, but anyway, I digress. And so, this just happened because this rub between the people of Shechem and the Jews is still happening to this day. So as we just covered the death of Joseph, keep in mind at our point in time during the events of Job, Joseph is still buried in Egypt, of course. And it's only at the time of the Exodus that his bones are brought out. But yeah, so as we've recently looked at the topic of Joseph's bones are still making headlines to this day. Yeah, so there's that. So that brings us to where we've left off in Job chapter 8. Oh, where'd the thingy go? There we are, present. That's what we were missing. Okay, so here we are. We pick it up in Job chapter 8, and as a refresh on the timeline, so Joseph died 1591 BC. We're looking just a few years later, maybe circa about 1588 BC. 140 years later, Job will die right before the time of the Exodus. So Moses spends 40 years in Egypt and another 40 years in Midian. Right here is Job is spending his last 40 years. So there's overlap with Moses and Job being neighbors here. Last 40 years of Job's life thereabout. So looking at Job chapter 8, there's just one verse that I want to get to. But as a quick reminder, we're again 1588 BC thereabout, so we're still Middle Bronze Age, 2A. China, we've got Emperor Taigang of the Shang dynasty. Pharaoh of Egypt is Sewed-Kari, 13th dynasty in that second intermediate period after Middle Kingdom, before the New Kingdom. Assyria's king is Rishon II. Ison's last king, Dami-Kilishu. Larsa's last king, Rimsin. Babylon's king is Apelsin, and Byblos' king is Yakin-El. Those are the folks. With the Lord's people in Egypt, Levi is 117 years old right now. Ballparking Perez, Hezron, and Ram, 3 generations in the line of Christ right now. Perez about 86, Hezron about 73, Ram about 15. Okay, so all that brings us to Job chapter 8. Bildad, one of Job's friends, is fussing at Job for the things that Job is saying. And I was really shocked by what he says, keeping in mind everything that's happened to Job. Look at what he says in verse 4. In the midst of everything that Job has gone through, Bildad, his friend, actually says to him in Job 8:4, if your sons sinned against him, then he turned them over to the power of their wrongdoing. He is lucky he is still standing after making that statement. Wow. Basically saying, sounds to me like your sons got what they deserve. They must have done something wrong. Ooh, I don't want to be in his shoes when the judgment comes down. That is about as presumptuous and unloving as it gets. And judgmental. Absolutely. I mean, that's just, I'm doing a double take with that one. Like, wow, this guy is not representing God at all in the midst of Job's grief. And he doesn't have all the facts. That is for sure. So definite lookout and warning for us. Even if we may be wondering, hey, maybe something's going on. Well, we don't have all the facts, so don't presume, and certainly don't kick someone when they're down without all that having facts. So that was just a standout verse for me in chapter 8. And again, as we're reviewing the book of Job, we're not going through the whole book, every chapter, word for word and all that stuff. We've already done that before in Sunday school. Just actually going through some highlights, some verses that stand out to me. And we're going to bring out some points from Dr. Henry Morris on his book, The Remarkable Record of Job, about how there's some actually cool stuff in Job scientifically and whatnot that we're still learning about today. So with that, if no reactions to any of those items, that brings us to chapter 9, where Job starts talking again. And this is where we'll get to Dr. Henry Morris. Check this out. Job chapter 9, Job says in describing God, he says in verse 8, God who alone stretches out the heavens and tramples down the waves of the sea. Stretches out the heavens. So Dr. Henry Morris makes this observation. This is a reference to the expanding universe concept that was recognized by 20th century astrophysicists. They recognize, wow, the universe is still expanding. Well, what did Job just say about God in Job 9, verse 8? He alone stretches out the heavens. And in the present, he's stretching them out, and it's still happening. So, yeah, there it is right there. It gets better. Verse 9. Job's continuing to describe God, who makes the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the constellations of the south. So Dr. Morris makes the point. As a matter of fact, in Job, God himself is identified as the author of the constellations and of individual stars, and several of them are named. And those are the names we still refer to them as today. Now we know, just a balance here, God's word forbids the practice of astrology. That's referenced in Isaiah 47 and whatnot. Astrology has long been associated with evolutionary pantheism and occultism and all those things. Now, if we look in the newspaper and see our horoscope, oh, that's cute or that's nice, whatever, in its place, that's not sin, as long as we're not putting our faith in that, putting our stock in that, whatever. He makes the point, Dr. Morris, it is significant. This oldest book of the Bible contains more specific references to the constellations than any other book, suggesting that these God-fearing men of this age were very much aware of the divine significance of these God-ordained star groups. Remember, we're told in Creation Week how God put them in their place. He created them and then put them in their place. One of the challenges to the young Earth concept is we know that stars are so many millions of miles away and it takes light time to travel. So for that light to have been generated where the star is now and to come over here takes a long time, and that's longer than we say the Earth is old, so therefore we must be wrong. Well, you're starting with a false assumption. You're assuming the star started there. We know that when God created the plants, he didn't snap his fingers or say, make it happen, and poof, there were plants. The Genesis record says that the plants sprouted up. It's like you've heard what's referred to as time-lapse photography, where you see a flower grow and open up and blossom, it's sped up. So it would have looked on that day of creation just like a sped up time-lapse photography. It happened really fast. The natural normal growth, he brought it to completion really fast. We're told in Genesis, he created the stars first and then moved them to their place. So God was able to bring that light and keep it going. So God set that up for us, so he made it happen. So it's not that the light is starting there and taking millions of years to get to us, so we must be millions of years old. No, this is the work of God. We're told how he did it to make it work. So the regulated movements of all the stars through the heavens, they recognize this, God ordained it. That's a testimony to the wisdom and power of the Creator. So any thoughts, reactions? Yeah.
Okay, so in my Bible, it shows that some of those constellations were named Greek names, which today we call them those names, but the Bible wasn't written in Greek, so were they different names?
They were recognized language yeah, exactly. The Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew and some Aramaic. First time it was ever translated was into Greek in the 200s BC. That's the Septuagint. But the names basically, the names are the same. They've just been translated from one language to another. Transliteration. Yeah, there's that too. Transliteration is when you take the exact word from a foreign language and move it over and now make it a word in the language being translated. The word baptize is one example of that. And so, so your great observation, same thing with the names of the pharaohs. None of the names of the pharaohs that we know them by or what they call themselves or what anyone else called them. Those are all the Greek versions. Yeah. Egyptology was started by Napoleon in the 1800s. It's only a couple hundred years old. And the great, by definition of the word great, you're choosing your definition there. The major impactful Napoleon, French guy, used the Greek names for these pharaohs in their Egyptology, and that's how we still know them as. And so, yeah, because after Alexander the Great kind of Greekified or Hellenized the modern world of his time, that influence still came. Latin became popular for a while, it faded out, and so we have all these things. So language is pretty fascinating and interesting, and its implications. So I'm really glad you asked the question. And so those names and those identities, even if it might be in different languages, those identifications have been passed on from the beginning. And we showed how Orion was a depiction of Nimrod and the different ideas and worships of him. And how he quite possibly is one who started taking the eyes off the creator and onto the horoscopes and the astrology with the Tower of Babel, and sort of led into that anti-God direction with all of that. So yeah, fascinating stuff. So that's what I've got to borrow from chapter 9. Nothing I wanted to bring out from chapter 10 specifically. Let's go to chapter 11. Or another one of Job's friends, Zophar, has some not so kind words for him. But he does make some true points. Sometimes what they say is accurate, but it's not accurately applied to the circumstance at hand. It's kind of a generality. And so something he says here that we'll get to. Job chapter 11, let's look at verses 7 and 8. Can you discover the depths of God? Can you discover the limits of the Almighty? They are as high as the heavens. What can you do? Deeper than Sheol, what can you know? So, as we talk about the stretching out of the heavens, they're still expanding, they're still going. And in fact, part of the young universe is recognizing if they're really as old as people say they should have gone a lot farther than they've gone. Spiral galaxies should have spun out by now and all those kind of things. Rings around planets should have dissipated by now, all those things. But modern astronomy, again, courtesy of Dr. Morris here, modern astronomy views the extent of the heavens as unlimited, just as is indicated here in Zophar's description of God and his work. Unlimited. You can't reach the end of it. I love the commercial that was on years ago where a guy comes down, sits on the sofa next to his wife and says, I did it. What? I surfed the internet. He had scrolled through the entire internet and reached the end of it. You know? And so just the mind-boggling concept there. And so, yeah, so recognizing that God is limitless as his creation is, and so that's recognized from the first book of the Bible right here. Even someone who's missing the application in Job's circumstance was right, generally speaking, about God himself. So that's, I also appreciate what he says in verse 11, for he knows false people and he sees injustice without investigating. God doesn't have to research. Everything is plain before his eyes and clear before his eyes. So I appreciated that reminder for us. So now we go back to Job in chapter 12, first verse. Then Job responded, tell me if you've ever felt like this when someone was trying to comfort you and they weren't being very comforting. Job 12, verse 1. Then Job responded, truly then, you are the people, and with you wisdom will die. But I have intelligence as well as you. I am not inferior to you. And who does not know such things as these? You ever have someone try to tell you something and you're like, duh, I know this, you're not being helpful, I'm not an idiot. And gee, where have you been all my life? You are just so wise. Gosh, when you die, wisdom's going to go to the grave with you because no one else has the wisdom you have. Little sarcasm. There's a lot of sarcasm in the Bible, actually. Yeah, exactly. If you're by yourself, maybe. And I say maybe. But yeah, let's not get ahead of ourselves and think, oh, I see what's going on. I know. One of my terrible bad habits that I'm still working on is I get so excited and engaged that I think I know what someone's going to say. And before I maturely stop myself, it's just out my mouth and I finish their sentence. And guess what? Sometimes I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. If I were just shut up, dial it back and listen and be in receive mode, I might get the full picture without cutting off not only the statement, but then cutting off the person that I'm trying to have a relationship and communicate with. And so, yeah, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's remember, we might not know everything. Let's be in listen and receive mode, especially when someone like Job has a lot that's going on. Okay, I'm going to pull up a chair, sit down, fill me in. I want to understand. I want to be in your shoes. I want to have compassion and not just sympathy, but empathy, Sister Ash.
I just think it is human nature to, well, okay. I saw a thing once that said that most people, they listen to respond before they listen to understand. You know, when we talk and interact and have back and forth, we're thinking what is our response to this? You know, so when sometimes we just need to understand or to just be present in that moment, you know, and it really is, sometimes you do have to step outside of yourself.
Bingo.
To put others first, to not try to solve their problems, to not say, oh, well, here's what you should do. Or, well, you know, my Uncle Joe, he did, this and that situation, it takes a lot sometimes to put yourself, as aside. And I think that's Job's friends were just a perfect example of that. It's, well, here, we've got this and this and this and this and this to say, especially in the face of these tragedies, so I think it's human nature, but then I also think God calls us to step outside of that human nature and to align with something, better.
Thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. And I hope all of you can laugh at me as well as with me in the example I'm about to share. So I'm the kind of guy that when someone tells me they're hurting, I don't want them to be hurting. So I try to think of, okay, well, what will solve the hurting? This is called Mr. Fix-It. Do you know sometimes Mr. Fix-It is not the need of the moment? Now, I don't mean to fall into the typical, battle of the sexes kind of thing and the jokes and stereotypes with that. There are some truths and generalities, basically, but sometimes, like, if my beautiful, wonderful wife tells me I got a headache, I'll say, oh, well, have you taken some pills? Have you, want me to get some pills and what? And sometimes, sometimes it's not a big enough headache to where you want to take pills. Sometimes you just want to let it ride out and hope it'll pass and all those kind of things. Sometimes, she's not telling me. She really could have thought of getting pills all by herself. She did not need me for that. Maybe sometimes she's just informing me, hey, I've got a headache right now, which is good for me to know. So I know, okay, well, she's not feeling well. Then that explains, or that might help me prepare for her not feeling at her best. It's a warning. I was dancing around that. You get the idea. Well, think of more serious levels. Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm going through this. Oh, well, here, boom, 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 boom. Well, that can come across like, are you doing this because you love me and you don't want me to suffer? Or are you just trying to shut me up and don't want there to be a problem anymore? There's that. Even though in my case, it's never a case of wanting to shut anyone up. It's a case of generally, I don't like to hurt. I don't want anyone else hurting. So I'm quick and reactionary. But sometimes it actually is more healing and more beneficial to be heard than to be medicated and treated or whatever the solution might be. The best thing Job's friends did, I'll keep saying it, was to sit down and shut up with him for 7 days. and just be there. I mean, that spoke volumes. Yeah, so there's that. So continuing on with Job 12, verse 4, he says, I'm a joke to my friends, the one who called on God and he answered him. The just and blameless man is a joke. Verse 5, he who is at ease holds disaster and contempt as prepared for those whose feet slip. That, number 5 was kind of an interesting verse. As Job says, I was known for being one in fellowship with God, and now I'm being mocked because this is happening to me. Verse 5, very, very interesting. He who is at ease, someone who's not going through any problems, holds disaster in contempt. Well, I'm not having any problems. So if someone's having problems, something's wrong with them. They have contempt when there are other people have problems. Contempt, disaster as prepared for those whose feet slip. Well, that must be because their feet slipping, so I hold them in contempt because disaster's on them. I'm at ease. So there's again this lack of recognition that there, but for the grace of God, go I. Anytime we can't say or are unwilling to say, if it weren't for God, that could be me, we are greatly overestimating ourselves. We don't know what we are capable of when things are stripped away from us, when we're threatened and scared, and there are other words that I'm trying to think of, but are escaping. When we're desperate people do different things. And so, yeah, so Job makes the point. Yeah, it's easy for you to say and look down on me when you're not going through what I'm going through. Easy for you to be judgy McJudgy over here, when if this were happening to you, you'd have a different attitude. And Job didn't do anything except do good for this to be brought upon him. No good deed goes unpunished, right? Seems like every time you try to do the right thing, you get grief and whatnot for it. So yeah, he goes on, skip down to verse 7. But just ask the animals and have them teach you, and the birds of the sky and have them tell you, or speak to the earth and have it teach you, and have the fish of the sea tell you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this, in whose hand is the life of every living thing, and the breath of all mankind? Does not the ear put words to the test as the palate tastes its food? So I thought this was really profound of Job to saying, okay, you guys who think you're so wise, get off your high horses and pedestals for a moment. Take a look at the animals. Check in with the animals. He mentions the animals, the birds, the earth, the fish. And he says, among the animals, birds, the earth, and the fish, among all those, who doesn't know that the hand of God is the one at work in all these things? They get it, that God is doing something and God is at work here. Maybe y'all need to get over yourselves and get back in touch. So as much as I am not a tree hugging hippie in the least, I'm 100% in agreement with Job that nature is God's creation. Mother Nature has a father, and nature is more in tune with God than sometimes his own people are. In fact, scripture talks about the earth groans with labor pains, looking forward to his coming. He's coming back. So yeah, this is powerful, important stuff. And Job kept perspective here, despite his suffering, despite the adding insult to injury, literally, with the insults from his friends being added to his injury. Maybe that's where that phrase came from. But he keeps his perspective here. Who knows? And so verse 24, we brought out in other circumstances, but I appreciate this quite a bit. Job 12, verse 24, talking about the Lord in perspective with people and their wisdom. Job 12, 24. He deprives the leaders of the earth's people of intelligence and makes them wander in a pathless wasteland. I read that and I say, maybe that, but I also say, okay, that makes sense now. I can't be too confused or crazy or freaked out about the state of the world right now when the leaders and the people in control, they're right there. If we're not going to seek God, we get what's not God. God is wisdom. So if we aren't seeking God, we're not getting wisdom. We're getting not wisdom. And so Job, first book of the Bible, was aware of that real life principle practical and spiritual. If the leaders of the earth depart from God, they're not going to have wisdom, and so the results are going to show. Which brings us to chapter 13. And again, as I've mentioned, if anyone's kind of read ahead and has other verses that have kind of stood out to them, they wanted to ask about, definitely bring those up as well. But Job chapter 13, let's check out verse 5. So Job's continuing to talk here. We've kind of touched on this already, but he makes the point. Job 13:5. Oh, that you would be completely silent and that it would become your wisdom. You've all heard the saying, and I get the wording mixed up sometimes. Even a fool is thought to be wise until he opens his mouth and proves otherwise, or something like that. Proves it, yeah. Yeah. And proves that he's not, yeah, exactly. There are different ways that it's worded, but yeah, the idea is when you're silent, people don't know what an idiot are until you open your mouth.
Kids, for my grandfather anyway, he didn't talk too much. But when he did, he listened.
Amen.
And it was always something full of wisdom
Amen.
for us kids. And I've always remembered that, even at 5, 6 years old, you know. So there can be the opposite
Beautifully.
of them.
Absolutely. That is something I admire so much because I ain't got it. I'm working towards it. I would love to aim more towards it and work harder towards it and improve towards it. But just the concept of being a man of fewer words, a person of fewer words, but whose words were more substance and impact and value. Silence is golden. Yeah. And yeah, I have great admiration and respect for those who've done a better job with that. So it's definitely a goal to seek.
We were watching Dynasty yesterday, and they were doing something, working, laying cement or something. And the brothers were just talking and being silly. And Phil, kept telling them, let's talking, just stop yapping, just let's work. You get more done when, and I thought about that, and I thought, oh my gosh, he's so true. There's so many episodes with him where he's talking about how, the women are chatting or whatever, and he's like, sometimes you just have to be still, you just have to zip it, and I thought about that, how many times, like you talk about, yourself, Eric, how I don't like uncomfortable silence.
From my radio days, dead air.
Yeah, dead air. I don't, because you think that that falls upon you to make sure everyone's warm and welcoming and all this stuff, you don't want anyone to feel awkward, so you might prattle on trying to make the situation better when you're just making it more weird.
I do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
The other thing that was funny might have been a different episode when one of the brothers' wives was doing this art thing, this cut and paste thing, and she said it was very comforting and soothing for her. So then the mom says, "Oh, that sounds great. I love that." So they get together, and then during the whole thing, the mom's just talking, and then the daughter-in-law says, "Well, this was a peaceful hobby of mine." So true, but then I thought, but what I've come to appreciate is that the mother-in-law, she was happy. She was talking because she was happy. So there's a difference and a place for that. So what else we got? Job chapter 13, verse 10, very important. Job 13, verse 10. Job says, "He will certainly punish you if you secretly show partiality." Ooh. Has this ever happened amongst the Lord's people where behind the scenes, secretly, favoritism and picking and choosing sides was playing out? Oh, it's the veil's being lifted on it right here. You shine the light. I love the phrase, sunlight, the best disinfectant. Says right here, God will certainly punish you if you do that. If you secretly show partiality. My thing is, okay, Paul talked to the Corinthians about how in some cases there need to be factions among you so that those who are actually in the right can be manifested and shown. Paraphrasing, but that's the idea. And there's going to be a dispute. You don't want to all be on the same page. That's the wrong page. If there's going to be some dispute, let there be one so that people who are right, so it can be made known that everyone can get on the right page is the goal there. So, but that happens when everything's known and brought to the public. Here, he's talking about what people are doing in secret. There is no reason for things done in secret when it comes to the Lord's house and his people. What's private in your own family, whatever, that's private. We get that. We talked about the difference between private and secret. If I'm wearing Spider-Man underoos right now, that's private. It's not a secret. You get the difference.
So now it's not.
Yeah. So we get the phrase TMI, too much information. Yes. But you get the idea. No harm if it comes up and it's not a lie. It's just private. Wasn't everyone's need to know. But and here's my thing, and for me, it's a matter of integrity. If you believe something to be right and true and needful, don't do it in secret. Be a man, be an adult, be a woman, stand by it in public. You don't have to manipulate and maneuver behind the scenes in the shadows in secret to try to get your way. If you're on the side of right and truth, you got nothing to hide. Stand for it. And if you're the voice of reason spiritually and you're the one right, the whole church is wrong, speak so that the whole church can get on your right page, which is actually God's right page if you are truly right. More than often, what I found to be the case is people who are guilty of Job 13:10, they ain't right. They're trying to get their own way, which is not God's way. And they have to manipulate and add up votes behind the scenes and win people over to their side and curry favors and manipulate to then, when they think they've got enough people worked up behind the scenes on their side, then they bring it in the public when they think they've got that sway and control. No Christ in any of that, and it's not how we roll, not how things work.
It's called passive aggressive.
Passive aggressive, there is zero room for that in the Lord's house. Passive aggressive is basically the idea of, well, things aren't going my way, and I could either get over it and get with the program and be one with my church, or if I've got a strong enough conviction, I can voice my concern and come together with my church and we can work it out together. Passive aggressive says no to both of those and says, well, I'm going to smile and nod like I accept this, but behind the scenes, I'm going to sabotage. No place for that. The beautiful heart attitude of Job in chapter 13, verse 15. Though he slay me, I will hope in him. Nevertheless, I will argue my ways before him. Even if God kills me, I still trust him. But I still want to have a conversation with him because I'm not understanding here. There's no contradiction in that one verse. It is all in keeping with his love for the Lord, his trust of the Lord, even when he doesn't fully understand. Even when he doesn't fully know the reasons or the whys or the wherefores. Wasn't clued into that conversation, whether it's on Mount Sinai or in heaven or wherever it took place. Job knew enough. He was at a point in his faith where God could take his life from this earth, and Job would still go to his grave trusting him, even if he didn't fully understand. More than once, Jesus said to his apostles in his church, what I'm doing, you don't understand right now, but you will. I pray to God that for each and every one of us in this church, Jesus Christ has earned our trust. I'm human, I'm going to let you down. You know that my desire is not to, and to try to have you follow me like I follow Christ, of course, but we recognize I'm human and I have my limits. Christ does not. And so I pray that our faith is always in him. And I know you all get this and know this, to the point to where if something that Christ is leading in is clearly from him, even if we don't understand why, even if we don't understand how that's going to play out or work out, if it's clear as day that it's of Christ, that we're able to say yes to it and embrace it and take hold of it, even if we don't fully understand. Now, as far as my role as pastor, I want to be transparent before God and everyone. I never want anyone to be worrying, well, what's the pastor thinking? What's the pastor doing? Where is he going with this? Does he mean me when he says that? No, things aren't directed, same standard for all of us. But I want to always be accountable and available and accessible if anyone ever has any questions. There should be, no one should ever leave a church service wondering, what's the pastor thinking or what's he doing? Or why is he saying or doing what he's doing? There should be total clarity on that. Christ in his authority and in his bigger zoom out picture is working things out and doesn't always fill in all the details. I want your faith to be in him, not me. And you get the idea there with all that. Verse 27, kind of just a trivia thing. Job's talking about imagery describing how he feels with what's going on that God has allowed and he doesn't understand. You put my feet in the stocks and watch all my paths, set a limit for the soles of my feet. Put my feet in the stocks. So we've all seen the imagery of someone who's being publicly punished and their feet are literally put in the wood and the things clasped over their feet and they're stuck there and it's a kind of a public display. Well, apparently that was going on back in the 1500s BC because he's saying that's what it feels like. Feels like my feet are being put in the stocks here. I'm being held bound and I can't move and I'm on display before everyone. So Job's kind of describing that. So trivia that concept and that practice was in existence at this time, way back then, first book of the Bible. And Job in his suffering and in his humiliation is spiritually and emotionally feeling like that's what's happening to him here. When we know it's not, what's happening to him is not a punishment in truth. There's a bigger picture. So my observation, I'll close with this thought and we'll pick up in 14 next week. My observation, back to human nature, is most of the people who think they're bad and wrong and God's punishing them, no, it's not the case. You're better in the eyes of God than you're realizing, and it's not all your fault or all you're doing. Those who think, hey, God's not great, not as great as you think. We tend to do the pendulum swing. And with that grateful humility and appreciation for the blessings in life and God's love for us, we can be at a great middle ground. Truth is often in the middle there. And so I think we can avoid either extreme. We'll be in a good place. So those are some thoughts on scrolling through some passages of Job. Again, we'll pick up in chapter 14 next week. Any reactions, any observations, any thoughts or questions from anyone on any of these things we have considered? All good? Right on. Enjoyed the conversation and contributions very much. We will stop our share, stop our recording, and get ready to go.